Smears of ash and lost life drifted through the war-torn streets of Axum. Hazy phantoms of rampant death drifting on the dying heat of molten metal and cooling corpses. Beneath them labored the still-living phantoms of the Republic, each bearing the face of a man now years dead, covered by the pale scowl of alien design. And beholding it all were blue eyes, searching the smoky ghosts of battle, seeking the sign of her counterpart's approach. Yet, time and time again, against the sullied silver walls and shattered blue glass of the smoldering spires, the only forms Ahsoka's eyes could find were those of the dead and the silent. Those who could not be helped, nor lend help any longer. Those of the lost. The glimpse of so many drove spikes into her, but they were not unfamiliar spikes. The Confederacy had massacred civilian populations, had corralled desperate separatists into suicidal charges for the sake of an advantage in battle. Grievous was no less a warlord than any of these Imperials. And yet, there had just been a magnitude to all of this that put what had come before to shame. This one battle felt like an entire week-long siege, and the sheer number of corpses was a slowly festering testament to that. The clones, to their credit, had made a token attempt to recover the dead beforehand, so as to not taint the meeting ground overmuch. But the task was one which would require a distinctly dedicated effort, and that kind of effort would need to wait. All the while, Ahsoka watched on, arms crossed, as the rest of the Republic delegation reached the meeting point. The young, former Jedi could not help but instinctively extend her senses to the Force, feeling the anxiety within the approaching prisoners they were herding, as well as the tension and barely constrained anger boiling inside of the clones who guarded over them. Even the approach of the Imperial delegation was noticed, brushing against her frayed senses. They were close, but not yet in sight. Ahsoka, feeling that one of their own was extending their senses back in her direction, doing much the same as she was. There was something mildly familiar in the presence, but she dared not entangle herself too closely with it, knowing well how dangerous Imperial Force wielders were from the reports the clones had delivered. Besides, every second counted, and Ahsoka intended to use the time wisely, moving her mind's projection past the extending arm of the other presence, and back toward the rest of the delegation, trying to feel if they... She winced and recoiled as something cold and violent slapped against her mind, like a strict teacher's ruler slapping over the exposed hand of a disobedient pupil. It was like being slapped with a solid, frozen bar of steel, and on top of that, one that was screaming, "Through me!" She managed to make out as she recovered, pulling her presence back from whatever defense they had around them. Clearly, they were quite interested in maintaining their subtle privacy, and Ahsoka, rubbing her head, huffed in frustration. Turning her thoughts back to what she might do, she looked around for the former captain, but now Commander Rex, raising her arm to signal him before staggering again, suddenly sensing something which swept over her preternatural senses like an ice-cold explosion. Her bones quaked inside her, flesh shuddering to follow, her breath exhaling, yet finding her voice caught in her throat. She could hear the clash of mighty waves careening against the fervor of erupting mountains, a distant but keening cacophony within the force that struck a sense within her, fear and alarm buzzing like wasps kicked from a nest. Something was happening, a collision of forces, or the revelation of a new force, something so sharp and rising that it ate all of Tano's attention until the moment that it was pulled back by something else.
Commander?
Rex asked, noticing how she had frozen up, able to see that something had affected the former Padawan and tensing himself in response, looking around as he drew his pistols. Ahsoka shook her head, Leku flailing across her shoulders lightly. She tried to focus on what this was, but despite how incredibly intense it felt, it only made it clearer that it was many, many miles away, far within the reaches of a different section of the city. To address it, whatever it was, would mean attention and resources she could not spare, not right now. She set her jaw and drew in a deep breath.
It's nothing, Rex, nothing,
she said quickly, looking off into the distant direction of the power she felt. Turning back, she blushed lightly when Rex's body language instantly conveyed his evident disbelief.
Ahsoka,
Rex began to say, the young woman waving him off before he could continue.
Not nothing, Rex, but nothing to do with us right now. It might actually be a very big something, but it's not something nearby, so please, put the prisoners over there, up against the wall.
She directed, pointing to her left.
And make sure Nerva Sharp, the droid woman in the back-a-tank, is near the front.
Commander Rex said nothing, eyeing her through his helmet before shallowly bowing his head in acknowledgement and turning to relay the orders to the other clones. The Imperial POWs were moved into position without resistance, their hands on their heads as they marched in a line, their eyes hollow and devoid of hope. Seeking some insight, and to reorient herself on the mission at hand, Ahsoka probed their emotions with the Force, moving more deeply than she had before, and, within them, felt something that sent a cold shock running through her. Only despair. The Togrutan teenager was once again made to grow beyond her years, as she faced the realization that these men and women had resigned themselves entirely to death and fully expected far worse. They had no expectation that whatever was about to happen might result in their actual release. They had no hope save for that of escape or liberation, violent liberation. They were grim, locked. Within them existed no conception of victory through anything less than war, total war, only war. She clenched her fists, fighting back the surge of hot frustration which bloomed in her chest. The heat of her sudden anger attempted to counteract the ice which was seeping up from the veins in her feet, born of germinating horror and shock, as well as more than a little disappointment. They acted like they came from a galaxy without any regard for POWs at all. That thought immediately had Ahsoka internally recoiling, but from her own hypocrisy. As she remembered General Grievous's treatment of prisoners of war, especially Jedi. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow, especially here and now.
Maybe we aren't so far behind them after all.
She muttered to herself as a team of clones moved past her and hurriedly began to set up a large meeting table, placing and anchoring it down to the ground before retrieving 4 repulsor field generators. Each generator was a tall leg with a projector at the top, easily high enough to be over the head of the tallest natural human. Once set and activated, the 4 tall repulsor generators projected a protective blue canopy over their heads, and though it was not powerful enough to do more than slow down anything like a falling body, Ahsoka still figured it would be of use when she considered the distant thunder rumbling ominously, coming closer and closer. After all, she did not predict that any of them would be keen on negotiating in the rain. The young warrior turned her head then, spotting Obi-Wan speaking with a couple of clones not too distant from her. Rubbing her chin and turning her head back towards the source of that disturbance in the Force, she angled towards her former master's former master and began to walk towards him, waving as she came in close. Seeing her approach, he wrapped up what he was saying and dismissed the clones with a nod of his head, the men saluting and running off at a hasty trot. The Jedi Master now turning to face Ahsoka.
Did you feel that?
she asked in a whisper, bright blue eyes alighting with the distant lightning. Obi-Wan nodded his head, stroking his beard ponderously with one bandaged hand.
I did. I've already sent orders addressing it.
He answered, eyes shimmering lightly with the far-off flashes born in the storm.
Addressing what? Do you know what it is?
Ahsoka asked back more urgently.
I don't know yet. However, I have my suspicions. And the direction I am sensing this from. It is the same general direction that Master Windu and I sent Ayla in order to help gather up the other Jedi. I don't know if she's involved or not, but...
He began to explain.
But it's better to be safe.
The former Jedi interjected with a nod, seeing Obi-Wan nod back before continuing.
Good. Then we can focus on just this meeting until it's over.
The ex-Padawan said with a sigh, shaking her head lightly. Obi-Wan nodded, his eyes sliding from the distance to her, his forehead creasing somewhat.
Ahsoka,
he began to say, picking his words carefully.
This may not work the way you think it will.
The Master continued before she interjected again.
Trust in the Force,
she said quickly, walking away as she did and heading towards the meeting table. She tried to project confidence, maybe even overconfidence, but as Obi-Wan's keen eyes followed her, Ahsoka knew just how hollow her words would sound. Yet, even in the face of that, she firmed her lips and her resolve. There was a chance here, hope, even if only a glimmer of it. She would not fail it by doing anything less than the most that she could do, give the most that she could give. Ahsoka's eyes narrowed, her teeth gritting tightly behind her pursed lips. She drove off the tension she felt encroaching on her with a deep, steadying breath. Then she turned herself to the intrusive thoughts of the Greater Republic, of Anakin, and Master Windu, the storm, and the strange sense. She drove them all away with her next breath, focusing entirely on the diplomatic battle that was now presented before her. She knew that if she failed, no one would die, not right away, but if she could win, then there was a chance no one else would have to die at all. Ahsoka may not have been a Jedi any longer, but she knew no other way of life. She was a soldier, a warrior, but more than that, she was a peacekeeper, a warrior who warred for harmony. All previous battles had been fights to stave off defeat or to inch towards a tactical win. But now the battle which was about to be waged could win her victory, not tactical, practical, or temporary victory, but what she would consider to be true victory. At the touch of those thoughts, Ahsoka cringed, feeling a twinge of pain in her head as she remembered the priest and his martyred men, as she remembered the look on his face when she begged him to surrender. She remembered Farnes's declaration, his fear, which had rapidly soured into hatred. And she remembered the bombardment of feeling and sensation she had been assaulted with during her time in orbit, the sound of billions upon billions of voices crying out in sudden terror, and then being silenced all at once.
True victory,
she muttered to herself.
Even if only on this one planet.
The former Jedi finished, a dark voice reminding the rest of the light which composed her that this war was far from over.
CGG-1, this is CGG-4, clearance code star 5 Beta Beta, over.
Larkin said through his headpiece. There was a pause, static crackling over his thick headset.
Copy CGG-4. Confirmation acquired and accepted. Please proceed, over.
Responded the operator on the other Golan defense platform.
We've detected another small group of spatial anomalies approaching from Sector T.
Larkin said, his voice straight, professional, hardly bored.
We are requesting a follow-up scan and pinpoint from your platform. Can you comply? Over.
Larkin continued, hands moving across the keys of his station, large screen before him indicating that the records of their own scan of Sector T was being forwarded to them. Another pause then, but not as long.
Copy that, CGG-4. Stand by for our secondary scan, over.
The other operator responded.
Copy. Standing by. Over.
Larkin sent before deactivating the mic on his headset and leaning back in his chair, sighing heavily.
Devil shifting it, eh, Lark?
Quipped Denora, smiling down at him in his control alcove as she walked across what passed for a command bridge on their defensive station. Larkin scoffed and reached up, taking the hot foam cup of fresh calf she kneeled down to hand to him. She smiled brightly down at him, and he felt a warm flush on his face. The job didn't have many perks, but he couldn't complain about getting to be around a charming blue tailhead.
More like quadruple shifting,
he said as he brought the cup down to his mouth, popping open the top and blowing over the surface of the hot, chocolate-colored calf.
Stray rods from that massive fleet jump keep wandering into the mid-rings and solar system, and we've got way too much stuff floating around to just let them go untagged or undusted.
Larkin continued to vent before taking a slow sip of his drink. Denora handed another foam cup to Jekar, the Duros man sitting 2 seats down from Larkin within the same alcove.
Is it non-delegated?
Jekar asked as he lowered his headset and reached up.
And with extra wabasap.
Denora replied, nodding as she did.
You're a treasure.
The Duros buzzed, taking the calf and prying open the top eagerly.
So what's with all the extra work?
The blue Twi'lek asked of no one in particular as she stood again and began to walk over to the next sunken alcove.
It's not because of all of us, is it?
She asked a moment later, and though she was out of sight, Larkin had no trouble at all imagining the distressed expression on her hairless blue features.
No!
He set out from his alcove.
It's got nothing to do with the refugees.
Another man, Sorsko, said from the next alcove over. Larkin could only hear Denora's sigh of relief and chose to go on.
It's that massive departure. Nearly the entire Republic fleet leaving all at once caused some major disturbances in mid and outer system debris.
He explained.
Asteroids, meteors, old wrecks that were in previously stable orbits. A lot of it has drifted out of alignment. And it's our job to keep not just Coruscant safe with our guns and armor, but also to keep as much of the system's infrastructure safe as well, using our deep-range scanners. Anything that might swing in and one day hit something has to be tracked, logged, and intercepted before it has a chance to.
Above him and out of sight, Denora stood from another delivery, folding the tray she had been using against her uniform and nodding her head.
Oh, so all the extra work is coming from all the junk the leaving fleets left behind.
She surmised.
Close enough.
Jekar hummed.
What do you mean?
Denora asked, prompting a heavy sigh from the man.
Well, it's not just supposed to be us. I'm looking at a whole shower of SA-9s falling into a trajectory with the capital itself, and from the sound of it, we were the first ones to call it in.
He grunted, indicating towards his screen for the benefit of no one in particular.
Why is that bad? What's an SA-9?
Denora followed up nervously.
Spatial anomalies of Category 9, unknown inert objects.
Another crewmate provided.
And it's bad because...
Larkin began to explain.
CGG-2 should have caught this an hour before us at least. To say nothing of one of the other out platforms. And these stick out like sore thumbs, aside from the fact that they'd be dangerously close to colliding with Coruscant in 6 or so months.
He went on, his voice lined with exasperation.
Irregular shapes, high-density cores, extrasolar trajectories...
The technical officer said, listing off what he could notice from the scans his own station had already taken and processed. He trailed off, the air going still and silent as he, as well as all of those who were listening, grew more and more alarmed with the descriptions.
Larkin, have you run that by a secondary scam yet?
Prayersons asked from her alcove, voice audible through the air but repeating from a speaker built into the side of his station. He sat up straight, sliding his calf into a holder as he leaned forward into his station, pressing the comm response key.
Yes, copy that. It was the first thing I did, and I'm still waiting for CGG-1 to get back to me with it.
He reported, eyes scanning his monitor as he narrowed the sensors down on the swarm of objects.
How long ago was that?
Jekar asked, leaning out from his own nearby station to voice the words more subtly to Larkin. For his part, Larkin did not answer, instead sliding his headset back up and activating a link between the two Golan defense platforms once more.
CGG-1, this is CGG-4. Clearance code star 5 beta beta. Over.
He said again. There was static, a faint buzzing, followed by nothing more. And with every growing moment, a pit was opening in Larkin's stomach.
CGG-1, this is CGG-4. Attempting to re-establish communication. Over.
He sent, leaning forward even more, as if his proximity to the screen would enable him to hear something. Anything. Everyone seemed to stop and listen, until, after several seconds of silence, a voice broke it.
Larkin.
Prayersons radioed from her alcove.
Confirm whether or not we have an incoming or outgoing comm lapse.
She said calmly through the speaker.
Copy that.
He responded quickly, flipping a few switches before pressing down on the comm button again.
Low control, this is CGG-4. Clearance code star 5 beta beta. Over.
He sent.
Copy that, CGG-4. This is low control. How can we help you? Over.
Was the prompt response, sending streaks of ice through Larkin's veins.
Prayerson, outgoing comm lapse confirmed on CGG-1.
He quickly reported.
Right.
Prayerson said, her voice clipped and professional.
Activate yellow alert and call the overseer to the bridge.
Obi-Wan moved to position himself slightly in front of Ahsoka and to her right, both of them converging on the setup table. His positioning helped to wordlessly assert his rank among the Republic delegation, not to Ahsoka, of course, but to their guests. Jocastanu's pale, willowy form glided beside him and to his own right, her expression terse yet calm, bringing with her a sense of serene rigidity, both mysterious and solid to the Imperial onlookers. Unfortunately, the red spatter across her white robes did dampen the effect somewhat. Behind the three Force wielders was Sergeant Barlex, rifle at the ready as he took up the rear guard. Ahsoka couldn't help but flick her eyes to him as he passed her, noticing something unusual in his posture, but had no time to investigate or even really think about it, trusting that if anything was of serious issue, he would bring it forward himself. Her eyes, unable to track Barlex as he moved behind her, were instead directed forward, towards where Sergeant Shatterlong and Commander Rex stood vigilantly, their eyes scanning the perimeter from the two repulsor emitters on the Republic's side of the table. She balled up her fist and issued two small coughs into it, her throat burning slightly thanks to all of the smoke in the air around them, the acrid scent of burning debris tainting the flavor in her mouth. Various levels of the city were on fire, and, aside from the automated systems, very few civilians were being deployed to deal with it, if any at all. Most of those normal people who remained were either moving away from the site of the battle or forming into militias to join it. The Republic settled in, and Ahsoka and the others waited and listened, their activity and speech dwindling down until all that remained was the whistling silence of the smoldering city, which was punctuated only occasionally by the beep of a probe droid, audible over the dull, constant crackle of faraway fires. Then, with a mechanical hum and warble, something new arrived, its ghastly, skeletal features emerging from a curtain of smoke and ash which drifted in the nearer distance. An Imperial skull droid entered her view, its hollow eye sockets glowing with an eerie set of lights, coloring the smoke green and red as it progressed. The strange Imperial machine hovered for a moment, lensed eyes tilting in orientation towards each of the Republic personnel in turn, before moving forward on invisible tethers. Ahsoka held her breath, keeping a composed face as more skull probes breached through the haze after the first, buzzing around like macabre bees, each one expressing an unsettling, if silent, curiosity. The clones went to raise their weapons defensively, but were prevented by Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, who raised their hands to forestall the actions of the troopers. The young, former Jedi's heart pounded in her chest as the imp droids buzzed about, keeping their distance as they did, before returning to the center of the approach, hovering in an arc-like pattern before the smoke. And then, the Imperial delegation emerged from the burnt miasma behind them, walking beneath the arc of skull droids, which were pulled along as the imps passed beneath. Despite Ahsoka's disdain of their previous displays of war-slicked madness, the young warrior was forced to admit to herself that the approaching Imperials were an imposing sight indeed. They marched forward with a cadence which betrayed no weakness, expressions set into a variety spanning determination, focus, rage, and even uncaring nonchalance. The state and condition of their armors and weapons betrayed the true toll of the long battle, yet suggested little flaw in their resolve. The Imperial delegation moved forward in a wedge-like formation, tipped by a man masked with a terrible, glittering skull. Ahsoka's eyes narrowed, not as if suspicious, but as if she were staring into the sun. She found it hard to stare directly at him, feeling a subtle ache in her skull growing stronger the closer he came. She had no doubt that Obi-Wan and Jocasta could feel it as well, even as her former master's master stepped forward and raised his hand in their direction.
"That's close enough, I think,"
he called to them, voice even but loud. The encroaching group paused for a moment, the armored woman standing behind the skull-faced man leaning forward and saying something into his ear. With her face turned, Ahsoka could not read her lips nor make out the words. The effect, however, was clear. He and the woman dressed in powered armor stepped forward, the former hefting a banner high over his head as he did, coming halfway between his delegation and where Master Kenobi stood. Ahsoka tried to read his expression, to sense his emotions, but the mask impaired or outright blocked her attempts. However, when she glanced over at Obi-Wan, she could see plainly that the Jedi Master recognized this Imperial leader and more.
"Will you be conducting these talks?"
the imp asked, standing close enough that he could be heard in the tense silence without raising his voice. Ahsoka could almost hear the grip tighten around the weapons held by the clones, could feel their desire to raise those rifles just as surely as she could see a similar desire written upon the severe face of the woman who stood behind the Imperial skull-faced leader.
"I believe we've already met once,"
was the Jedi General's easy reply.
"But I don't think we exchanged names at the time. I am a Jedi Master of the Galactic Republic. My name is Obi-Wan Kenobi."
Ahsoka's friend and teacher introduced himself.
"And though this might make your current High Command nervous, I am serving as the voice of our local deployed forces in these talks."
Obi-Wan finished with a shallow bow, a faint smile on his lips. The skull-masked man remained silent, a palpable, humorless air emanating from him and suffocating the attempt at levity. The man seemed almost as likely to leap upon Obi-Wan and attempt to impale him on his flagpole as he did to simply stare him down. When Obi-Wan opened his mouth to speak again, the Imperial cut him off.
"We are here under your request,"
the man stated flatly, almost harshly,
"in order to discuss the exchange of prisoners, and little else."
He finished, voice as hard and cold as stone itself, particularly as he emphasized the last 3 words. A tense silence followed, in which the faint smile on Obi-Wan's lips dried up like water on the sands of Tatooine.
"Of course,"
he replied, voice more stiff.
Then we had better get started then. General, I assume? Forgive me, you're only the second or third skull-faced adversary
Obi-Wan began to go on, smoothing his tone only to be interrupted.
I am called Saint Lazarus, and I am here for many reasons.
The Imperial interjected, frigid voice like the steel of a knife.
And none of them include exchanging pointless pleasantries with a witch I nearly killed in battle.
He hissed.
And that nearly killed me.
The man concluded, taking one step closer and bringing with that step a desire for violence so great it made both Jocasta and Ahsoka thumb their lightsabers at their sides. Obi-Wan, however, did not shrink back, did not even flinch or alter his posture, meeting the Imperial's eyes evenly, unfearing. Ahsoka could feel the pressure coming off that skull-like mask, and knew it must be worse for Obi-Wan, who was right in front of it. For her, it was hard to imagine remaining so composed, with the thing right in her face like it was for him. But regardless, Kenobi did not surrender a thing, not even a sign of discomfort. The silence that followed did not actually last very long, but the adrenaline prompted by the moment made it seem far lengthier than it actually was to everyone present. Well, almost everyone. The tense air was suddenly stirred by the introduction of a new noise. A crunching sound interrupted their stare-down, the sound not unlike that of a small glass ball being broken up within a wet leather bag. Ahsoka frowned, following the noise as eyes from both sides turned to do the same, her hand instinctively dropping to the lightsaber at her waist. The sound was swiftly revealed to be coming from a woman on the Imperial side. Short and of slender figure, with sunken eyes and a sickly pale pallor which were at obvious odds with the easy grin she wore on her face, the Imperial smiled as she chewed through something in her mouth. A brittle lollipop, Ahsoka realized. The woman seemed not to notice for a second, as all eyes turned to her before she twitched ever so slightly and began to look around, luminous blue eyes sweeping back and forth. She seemed to catch on to all the attention drifting over to her, and beamed even more brightly, smiling despite the rapidly shrinking bulge in her cheek, still chewing.
Hello!
She chirped through a mouthful of sugar fragments.
I'm Hecate!
The Imperial woman introduced herself, making to step forward towards Obi-Wan, but quickly pulled up short by her shoulder, the large man beside her releasing a slow sigh as his left hand held her in place. His right hand reached up to massage his temples.
I almost killed you too, by the way!
She added as she was reeled in, pointing at Kenobi, who raised his eyebrows at the statement, remembering all too clearly the Imperial person-shaped weapon he had crossed blades with earlier.
Heck, that's enough. Be silent.
The large man ordered gruffly, to the evident annoyance of the woman.
I'm not going to kill him right now. Besides, you said so yourself. We're here to talk.
She whined petulantly over her shoulder before looking back at Obi-Wan. The Jedi Master seemed surprised at first, before his bemusement whittled down to a weary smile.
Loath as I am to start this off by agreeing with you,
Obi-Wan began to say,
she's right. We are here to talk, so let us sit and talk.
The Jedi Master finished, stepping back and to the side, gesturing towards the meeting table. Ahsoka and Jocasta both moved to sit at the gesture, showing that the far side was for the Republic as they moved behind the table. The skull drones buzzed forward at that, several scanning various things all at once with grid patterns of hazy green light. The one-armed droid woman who took up one of the flanks of the Imperial wedge gave an ascending chime from her vocalizer, and the skull-faced man nodded.
Let it be so.
He acquiesced at last, moving forward, briskly followed by the rest of his delegation. Obi-Wan took his seat across from the man called Lazarus.
Well, no need for fanfare,
said the Jedi Master.
Let us begin.
You know why we are here,
began the man called Saint Lazarus, leaning forward as he spoke, mechanical arm whining slightly.
Give us our soldiers, as you promised,
he demanded. Obi-Wan raised an eyebrow, keeping his back straight and his face composed, as he responded.
And we will, in time, but let us leave that for...
He began to say, but was cut off as a huge fist was slammed down onto the table. Ahsoka jerked, both her and Jocasta nearly rising to their feet at the Commissar's sudden act. Taking a breath to wind herself down, she focused on something else and had to subdue a smirk. Ahsoka had known it was a good idea to insist on a Durasteel table for this meeting. A large dent was left in the metal surface of it, branded there by the weight of the inactive weapon that had been pounded against it.
Not good enough,
snapped the red-garbed woman whose entire right arm was enwreathed in a thick mechanical gauntlet.
We were told we would receive our people just for showing up to this farce.
She railed, face reddening as well.
And you will.
Ahsoka interjected appeasingly. Obi-Wan glanced at her, but she pressed on.
You will get them. All we ask is that you take them at the end of the talks, not the start. That way we can guarantee you hear us out.
She appealed. The woman opened her mouth to answer, but was forestalled by their leader's raised hand.
Then I hope you intend to keep these negotiations short,
Saint Lazarus growled, Ahsoka wincing slightly as he turned his skull face to regard her. The strange, quartz-infused skull stung her just to stare at it, and with his focus on her, it felt even worse, more intense.
I do imagine this first meeting will be rather rudimentary.
Obi-Wan cut in, drawing the focus back to himself.
How quickly we cross those rudiments depends as much on all of you as on us,
he explained.
First, we should begin the negotiations, see how much we can agree on and how much we cannot. Either way, we will turn over the prisoners of war we have present at the conclusion of these talks.
The Jedi Master put forward, but found himself being denied before he could finish, this time by the shaking head of the red-robed droid woman.
Unacceptable. Surrender Nerva Sharp to us immediately.
The Metal Priestess droned, her skull droids buzzing more loudly around her, picking up speed and evident agitation.
If you do not acquiesce to this demand, the Adeptus Mechanicus will conclude these talks immediately.
Behind her, the bodyguard with the broken gas mask stepped forward, pistol in hand but raised up at the sky, at least for the moment. The clone troopers tightened the grips they had on their blaster rifles, tensions rapidly filling the air again. Obi-Wan remained calm, his gaze steady in spite of the threat.
These talks won't truly begin if all we receive from your side are demands. Nerva Sharp is one prisoner among many, I presume? She will be released to you with the others here. We'll ensure that she is in that group. Will that suffice?
The Jedi Master asked.
Negative. This is not acceptable.
The metallic priestess insisted.
You will hand her over to us, now, as a gesture of goodwill.
She pressed. Obi-Wan grimaced at her reply, shaking his head.
Not exactly a gesture of goodwill if you compel it from us with...
He started.
Master.
Ahsoka suddenly said, leaning in his direction.
Nerva is a special case.
She began to explain.
She needs medical attention from one of her own order. Nerva was in a deteriorating condition the last time I checked.
She said, hoping Obi-Wan would understand. The Jedi studied her, raising an eyebrow before nodding and then turning back to the Imperial delegation.
All right. A gesture of goodwill, then.
He said with a sigh as he raised a hand to summon one of the clones forward.
Commander Rex, bring her here, if you would.
The Jedi Master said. Rex nodded sharply and issued a few orders over his comms, never losing sight of the Imperials before him, and shortly after, Nerva's Bacta-tank was pushed forward and brought to the delegation. The droidified woman floated unconscious in the healing liquid, suspended by a harness, a breathing mask firmly secured to her face. Ahsoka didn't need to look at the vital monitors mounted onto the tank to know that the situation was dire. She could feel the machine priestess's life ebbing away, each heartbeat a teeny bit weaker than the last. The elder priestess of the delegation stepped forward, her skull drones buzzing around the tank, each scanning with their own sensors.
I need access to air.
The delegation's priestess droned, and, with a nod from Ahsoka, the clones began draining the tank, opening it once it was empty. Nerva hung from the suspension harness, wires and sensors taped to her body in various places, feeding the monitors the data they needed in order to display her weakening vital signs. The attending one-armed priestess reached down and began to methodically disconnect the wires, moving quickly but unhooking only a few before she was swiftly stopped. Standing up from his seat beside the gauntleted woman and walking forward with a natural tempo that did not raise notice quickly, Farnes approached the attending droid woman and raised his rifle, aiming it right at the back of the priestess's head.
"Leave those on,"
he ordered, voice hard. Sharp breaths were drawn, hands tightening, nerves being tested, but not a one among them reacted as quickly as the single-armed bodyguard of the priestess, who immediately lowered his weapon right into the face of Farnes. Though sweat slicked his forehead, the guardsman did not flinch.
"Step away,"
was the one-armed soldier's simple and only command.
"I'm doing what I was charged to do,"
were the words Farnes shot back, eyes darting between the gun in his face, the impassive expression of the young man holding it, and the back of the tech priestess's head, which was still pressed lightly against the barrel of his imperial weapon.
"Hold!"
St. Lazarus ordered sharply, hands slamming down flat against the table. The young, one-eyed man holding Farnes at gunpoint said nothing, but neither did he pull the trigger, single eye unmoving.
I am the only one who can save air. Remove your weapon.
The priestess droned. The words brought a furious expression to Farnes's face, and he prodded her head more roughly with the barrel of his gun, prompting the bodyguard to do something similar back, though Farnes pointedly ignored him.
"Then you better get started on saving her, Your Holiness."
The young guardsman almost growled, gritting his teeth, heart beating heavy, but his aim remaining steady.
"Because if Nerva dies, then you die."
The Space Marines were menacingly silent, standing straight-backed and stiff, weapons in their hands as they glared, either with their bare eyes or through their helmets at their alien guests. The mercenary could tell that they were only barely constraining themselves from aiming at the chittering aliens and their massive, sand-traversing transport directly. Luckily, the Jawas were just not a big enough threat to force the issue, and, like it or not, they had few choices beyond dealing with little red-robed aliens if they wanted to get this station up and running that very same day. There was a sudden, small explosion and a puff of smoke that then issued out from the interior of one of the buildings, where the bulk of the machinery was housed. Bolter snapped up at the disturbance, aimed at the mouth of the station as three squeaking, chittering Jawas came running out, spinning and diverging chaotically as they yipped and coughed. They were followed out by a large space wolf, the darkly armored and most cybernetically enhanced one of the Space Marines, who himself was waving his hand in front of his face as if to clear a bad smell. He scowled all the while, his other hand clenched into a fist which he was shaking back and forth at them.
"Damned smelt rats!"
He bellowed after the fleeing aliens, who scattered and ran, bumping into each other as they formed haphazard zigzags, squealing and squeaking while they skittered back to their sand crawler. Wiping soot from his face and cursing, the one known as the Iron Father took a deep breath.
Fet!
He boomed even more loudly, his voice echoing between the small clusters of buildings and out across the sands.
Right here,
said the young mercenary, leaning just behind him and to his left, back against the same building the Marine had just exited. The massive, cybernetic man spun around to face him, sand scattering as he stomped over to the nonplussed clone. His shadow completely swallowed up the merc, the Iron Father looming over him, one nostril flaring on his half-metal face.
I told you to let me fight him for you.
Fet managed to add casually from within his helmet just before the Astartes tirade began.
Those Xenos pests are selling us junk!
He bellowed, stabbing an accusatory finger in Boba's direction.
I warned you about that too. That's why you should have let me find the converter.
The clone shot back at the Space Marine, pushing himself off of the wall and fully facing the infuriated warrior.
You expect me to believe that some baseline runt like you can spot what we need better than I can?
The Imperial spat.
No, but I know how to haggle with Jawas better than you do. Now you ought to avoid the runarounds and scams.
Fet retorted easily. The Marine threw his hands up into the air, the act so sudden and powerful that it sent a small wind out from him, making Boba flinch back.
I should have them all shot for even attempting to scam us. Then we can pick the part out of the ridiculous rusted transport.
The Iron Father ranted.
That's a bad idea,
Boba contended, emphasizing the word bad. The Marine rounded on him again.
Your sympathy for the Xenos is disturbing. Whom do you really serve?
The Astartes challenged.
It isn't sympathy, it's just common sense, you half-baked toaster.
The mercenary shot back.
Half-baked toaster? Ye impertinent little whelp! I am Iron Father Yarvaster of the Volca Fenrica, and I will not!
The Marine almost roared, flesh side of his face flushing red.
Will not succeed in getting to Station Orkting if you keep arguing with me.
Fet finished for him. The clone thought he could hear the gears grinding in the man's head as he brought himself closer, scowling, lines on his organic face drawn deep and severe.
Give me even one good reason, then!
The Space Wolf roared into the young merc's face.
One good reason I shouldn't have all these up-jumped vermin strung up and disemboweled!
Better, I'll give you 3.
Boba yelled back at the behemoth of a man, jutting a trio of fingers up ruefully in front of the Marine's eyes.
1. Jawas are tricky, pack ion weapons, and their sandcrawlers are mobile fortresses. Last time I checked, a bunch of bulky 7 and 8 foot tall furheads and droid suits are not a good matchup for a fight inside of a 4 foot tall tunnel. Especially one crammed full of weapons and traps made to turn droids off. It's just a fight we do not need.
The mercenary vied, gesturing at the massive crawler in question.
You actually think we'd have any trouble coating the sand in their filthy...
Yarfestar began to retort, but Boba did not stop.
2. Their sandcrawlers are like mazes. It could take us hours or days to find what we need if we have to sort through it ourselves. And that's if they even have what we want, and that's if they don't destroy it first.
The clone pointed out.
And 3, if you do kill them, good luck ever finding another Jawa to do business with you. They may be annoying, and dealing with them may be a price in time and patience that none of us want to pay, but that should only clue you into how necessary they are on Tatooine. These Xenos, as you call them, are everywhere, trading in everything, and they have a nasty habit of showing up right when you have no other options left. You know, kinda like right now.
The Marine's face lined deeply, his lips pulling back to show elongated fangs, his fists clenching, servos squealing with the effort. Fet stared him down, unflinching in the face of the giant man. That is, until that man swung one of those massive metal fists in his direction.
Kark!
He shouted, trying to throw himself back against the sand, but his reflex to do so came almost 8 picoseconds too late. The crack was audible for some distance across the windswept expanse, echoing out and driving several horned geckos beneath the sand. Boba's body fell back against the yielding ground, his eyes wide as his brain tried to reconcile the speed of the huge man with his bulk. As with most baseline brains, it failed to do so, and left Boba with only an eerie, uncanny fear in its wake. The Iron Father had buried his arm almost up to his elbow in the side of the building where Boba had been leaning before. The impact cracking like a whip as the sound barrier broke against the Space Marine's ceramite fist. Still scowling deeply, the Iron Father of the local Space Wolves ripped his arm out of the wall, shaking it off and turning around.
You got one chance, whelp!
The Marine growled over his shoulder.
Come back with that right converter, or next time I see you, I'll throw you through this wall!
He promised coldly before walking back into the smoking room and beginning to resume his work. Boba, chest rising and falling heavily in the sudden gout of adrenaline that filled him, nodded from the ground.
Yeah, right.
He said breathlessly to the Marine's back, remaining on the ground for almost a minute after. He winced then as something grabbed him from behind and yanked him up by the collar of his armor.
You done it now,
Yannick said to the squirming clone as he set him back down on his feet with his one arm, grinning and almost laughing as he spoke.
Yeah? Well, at least I get to do this my way now.
The flustered Fett said, shoving Yannick's arm away and dusting himself off rapidly.
Don't be angry now, whelp.
Yannick said with a laugh as he backed off. Felagi, the six-limbed wolf, growling at Boba as it wove between Yannick's legs.
I think the Iron Father is taking a liking to you.
He added with a loud laugh as Fett began to make his way towards the sandcrawler, Yannick and Felagi following close behind.